Babel was humanity saying, let's do it our way and make a name for ourselves, and it led to alienation and separation. Put God at the centre, you get peoples in harmony. You get a beautiful picture of the world increasingly united, not through might, but through the goodness of God. That's what we look forward to in the new creation. People from every nation, all cultures, with all their culture, gathering around the throne of Christ.
Hello, welcome to the Bible OverBrew. It is great to be with you. I'm Rachel Redeemed, and we have Matt Searles with us. Matt, have you got your brew?
Brew in hand, I'm ready. Rachel, yeah, how you doing your end?
Good. I'm armed with something berry-ish. I think hibiscus and apple are the key themes. It's a new one, so we'll see how we get on. But are you fruiting it?
One Kings are hibiscus and apple.
Clearly. Are you builders?
No, Yorkshire tea, back to, yeah. Very boring, but serves me well.
Strong choice. But indeed, it is 1 Kings today. I'm glad to be having you holding our hand as we step into chapters 1 to 16, with our key chapters being 3 to 6, 8 and 10. The BibleOverbrew.com, of course, has questions, steers, notes, those numbers again. And this is our episode 14. So we're moving along and we are getting into 3 sessions in Kings. We must begin with the joy that I've been so appreciating is the story so far. Can you give us a hand?
We've come quite a way, haven't we? But we remember it began with God creating this beautiful world and Adam and Eve placed in this garden. I think actually as we come to 1 Kings, it'll be worth spending a bit of time in the Garden of Eden because we'll see there are some links. So Adam and Eve given this beautiful world, they're told to fill the earth and subdue it. They're told to rule over the fish of the seas and the birds of the air and the beasts of the field. So they have this kingly role of rule and fill the earth and subdue it. I think that's bring the world from one degree of glory to another. They were in the garden, which was planted by the Lord, which was beautiful, but the rest of the world was somewhat unformed, unfinished. We're still waiting for things to grow. We're still waiting for Adam and Eve to have this role of tending creation. And so they've got this role of expanding the boundaries of the garden, really, of making the world like the garden, of bringing God's glory to the whole earth. And I think it's helpful seeing Adam as the first king in that sense. Something of what kingship should be like, this good, wise stewardship of the world and creation. Of course, that didn't happen. That didn't last for long. Adam and Eve, rather than living God's way, they chose to go their own way, grasping at the forbidden fruit. And we've seen lots of characters since then seeing something, liking the look of it, grasping it, despite God saying no. That led to them being exiled, cast out of the garden, cast out to the east. That's a bit of significant direction that we'll see again and again, people being cast out to the east of God's presence. And then really the story is can humanity be brought back into the garden? Can humanity be brought back to God? It's about a geographical return, but as we've said a few times, it's about a spiritual return as well. Humanity is not just physically away from God, but spiritually far from God, doing their own thing. Can humanity dwell with God again? Really is the question. And then we have this little glimmer of hope. There's a serpent crusher going to come. So someone's going to come and defeat evil. Maybe that's how humanity will get back into the garden. The rest of Genesis is really centered on Abraham and his family. God says to this one guy, Abraham, doing his own thing, I'm going to make you a people. I'm going to give you a land. I'm going to bless you. We're starting to see a reversal of those curses. We trace Abraham and his family. By the end of Genesis, they've gone down to Egypt. It's been a famine, so they're in Egypt. Start of Exodus, they're enslaved. And then really from there on, there's this story from Egypt, this place of slavery and death, from Egypt, bringing them to the promised land. And that's where we've got to. So they were rescued from Egypt. We had the Passover, parting of the Red Sea, all of that, going through the wilderness, Mount Sinai, the law, the tabernacle, God's dwelling amongst them, Numbers, disobedience and grumbling, Deuteronomy, second giving of the Lord just at the edge of the land, Joshua crossing over into the land. It's all this same story of coming up out of Egypt into this new Eden type land. Joshua, they come into the land, but then Judges, we kind of expect things to be bright, but no, people do their own thing because there's no king. So we get the misery of life with no king. And so the books of Samuel are where kingship comes to the fore. And we get this promise that there will be a king who will rule God's people, a king given for their good. A king,
Mm.
not like Saul, who's a kind of a me first, my way, mighty
Mm.
man type king. No, David, the unlikely, humble
Mm.
king. But David isn't the one. David isn't the one through whom all these promises are going to come. And so God promises David in 2 Samuel 7, which we covered just a little while ago, your son, you will have a son, David, and he will build my house. He'll build the temple. But then the promises seem to get too big for just one physical son of David. He will rule forever.
Mm.
And so we've sort of seen something of kingship, and we're waiting for the son of David who'll build the temple and through whom blessing will come. And so
Mm.
that's what we're left with at the end of Samuel as we get into the books of Kings.
Hmm. Cool. So, how are we doing on those promises, God's promises to Abraham and Adam and David by the time we actually get to Kings? Are we kind of in a good place with those?
The promises to Abraham was people. Probably say tick to that.
Mm.
Land, well, they're in the land, they're in the right place.
Mm.
Blessing,
Mm.
yeah, sort of, we're sort of tentative on that one, maybe.
Okay.
It's certainly not life as it should be, but it's looking, I think, looking hopeful. Probably we might
Mm.
say David was something of a serpent crusher figure. We saw it in his killing of Goliath. He defeated the enemies on behalf of the people. David won the
Mm.
victory, so the people benefited, which led to peace and rest. So we're sort of seeing some glimpses, some hope, and then really, I guess our focus on, okay, this promise to David, you'll have a son. He'll build the house for my name. He'll build the temple, and he will be in this wonderfully close relationship with God. He will even be called God's son, and he
Mm.
will reign forever. And so, if we're in the
Mm.
narrative, I guess we're thinking when we meet David's son Solomon, is this the
Mm.
guy? We've done the story so far. I think at this point, it's also worth seeing where this story is going to end. I guess I mean, in a sense, all the stories are going to climax in Jesus, but it's helpful because so often we think of Jesus as our king. That's a fairly
Mm.
common, I say we think of, the New Testament speaks of Jesus as our king.
Mm.
Jesus proclaims the kingdom of God. And so kingdom language is really
Mm.
common in the Gospels, but our understanding of that should come from this part of the Old Testament. But
Mm.
if we get our understanding of these ideas, kingdom, from our own culture or books we
Mm.
read, I think we'll have I don't know, a wrong view. I mean, if you are chatting to
Mm.
someone in the street and you kind of talk about a king, what sort of things are
Yeah.
people thinking? Would you say?
Yeah, I think that's really helpful, isn't it? Because yeah, you can either kind of go proper old school, kind of King Henry VIII, lots of power, lots of like I don't know. I tend to think of it as quite inward focused. It was about them being the wealthy ones and then everyone else being poor financially, or kind of maybe modern day coronation vibes. You see both kind of a lot of grand, you know, beautiful things, but maybe somebody who doesn't have as much power that the
Yeah,
government is doing everything. So there's those kind of the old and new school versions, or I guess maybe kind of an international version. You might have, you know, kind of. Uh, 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 maybe it's a positive view, but I perhaps think it might be more negative that it's
mm,
somebody who's kind of ended up there either through nothing they've done or that they've kind of made themselves that person in power, and then they
yeah,
get all the yeah power and finance and wealth and stuff, but not always maybe in a positive light. Maybe in, you know, fairy tales there's good, but
yeah.
mm,
But it just shows, doesn't it, that actually we all bring so many different things to that. So if we just speak to our average friend on the street
huh,
and say Jesus is king, in fact
yeah,
he's a king with unlimited power, that that
wow,
that could mean very different things. For some people, that might be a really scary thing if they've seen
yeah,
how kings wield power, or king, ruler, oppressive regime, perhaps.
yeah,
I think
yeah,
we want to be really careful because the kingdom of God is announced as good news. And so if we
yeah,
just simply say Jesus is a king and people assume, like every other king,
mm,
ruler.
yeah,
Yeah, so that's one of the reasons that I'm excited by these chapters. And I think a lens to help us. There's a whole bunch of names and they all sound the same. There's lots that's going to be harder as we read through. But if we can see, particularly in Solomon, at his best, and of course we'll see, like all human kings, all human people sin and fail and the people suffer. But Solomon at his
Yeah.
best gives us a glimpse of why, when in Jesus' day the kingdom of God was announced, a Messiah, remember that's the king word, that's the anointed word, a Messiah was announced, people were like, yes, this is good news.
Huh.
It's probably because they were thinking of these chapters and remembering, oh yeah, life was good when we had a king like that. But we get ahead of ourselves. But I hope that's what we'll see
Yes.
in these chapters.
Well, we kick off Kings with David being very old and frail. There's a little bit of a strange thing with a human hot water bottle. Then someone else tries to nick the throne. You get King Adonijah, self-proclaimed, but then some shilly-shallying back and forth, and we do get Solomon as the king. And he's, I take it, the correct king because he's in the line of David.
Yeah.
And we get that reminder again in chapter 2 about what does it mean to be a king. And so David is telling Solomon that it's about faithfulness to Yahweh. It's about that kind of the Deuteronomy 17 stuff we looked at before, about doing things God's way, not having loads of horses, wives, or gold. Possibly worth noting that for future.
Yeah, Solomon, bear that in mind.
Yeah, if people have been tracking with us, they'll have seen that bit buried in Deuteronomy 17.
Yeah.
But it does assume a knowledge that you're clocking stuff as you go, to be like, when it states it, it's not saying, oh, this is a good thing. To be like, it's described, not prescribed. This is not supposed to be, folks. But then we have the death of David, and Solomon fully takes over. What should we be noting as we jump into this bit of the story?
As we read, and hopefully people have read or listened to these chapters, I think something of the Adam in Eden vibes going on. To see Solomon, I think, is presented in that sort of way, that the land has been presented as something of a new Eden. I mean, we get this wonderful, there's little moments in Solomon's life that sort of jump out and stick in popular culture. One of them is that moment when God says you can have whatever you want. And we get this wonderful thing that he asks for wisdom rather than gold or riches in chapter 3. And so Solomon will be a wise king, and it's a pretty good start. He asks for wisdom because he wants to govern well. And that famous story of the two women arguing the baby's theirs, and Solomon's judgment to discern the true mother. I think in chapter 4, just we see what it meant for the people. I don't know if you've got 4 verse sort of 20 and following, but I think to see why having a king like Solomon was good news.
Yeah, let me read those verses for us. The people of Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They ate, drank, and they were happy. And Solomon ruled over all the kingdoms of the Euphrates River to the land of the Philistines, as far as the border of Egypt. These countries brought tribute and were Solomon's subjects all his life. Solomon's daily provisions were 30 cors of the finest flour, 60 cors of meal, 10 head of the stall-fed cattle, 20 of pasture-fed cattle, and 100 sheep and goats, as well as deer, gazelles, roebucks, and choice fowl. For he ruled over all the kingdoms west of the Euphrates River, from Tipsha to Gaza, and had peace on all sides. During Solomon's lifetime, Judah and Israel, from Dan to Beersheba, lived in safety, everyone under their own vine and under their own fig tree.
I mean, there's a whole lot of animals and numbers and places we might not get, but I hope that the overall picture's clear from these verses. I mean, they ate, they drank, they were happy. I mean, that's got to be good. That sounds like life as it should be. Having a good king meant peace. It meant prosperity. I think that's why all these cattle and number. I think it's prosperity. It wasn't scarcity, all under their own vine and their fig tree. It's this picture of a sort of Eden-type bliss. So for a time, things were as they should be. Even they were as numerous as the sand by the sea. That was the promise to Abraham in Genesis 22. Yeah. So I think we're seeing life as it should be, just for a moment. We remember that as we turn the corner and things get progressively worse. I think we look back to these days going, if only a king like Solomon, but better would come, we would know peace, we would know prosperity, we would know life life put together rightly. I think that's the hope.
Mm.
That's what we bear in mind when we come to the proclamation in the New Testament of Jesus as King, and why that is
Mm.
gospel, why that's good news.
Yeah, that's quite a different picture. That's helpful to get some clarity on that. And I mean, we run into, I mean, it's a lot of description and detail, but it is just letting it kind of wash over. You get this absolutely beautiful picture of the temple, what it
Mm.
would have been like to be somebody living there at that time. In the notes, you encouraged us to think about what would it do for all of our five senses. And I was just riffing off that for like seeing all that kind of gold and beauty would have just been. It's just so exciting to see when people use nature in architecture. It can be so beautiful, and so many of those Eden vibes coming through
Yeah.
in that architecture. The smell, there was sacrifices actually going on, so hopefully a bit of barbecue vibes. You've got the sound of ships coming in, like an economy that's doing well, the opportunity for
Yeah.
people to have good work, and hear people worshipping the Lord, tasting. There's all this talk of food and overabundance of it, I think, is
Mm.
highlighted. And just, even sense of touch, all these lovely garments that they're getting in, all these exotic animals. And it's
Mm.
just again and again and again, it's to every which way you can imagine it. It would have been both beautiful and enjoyable and
Mm.
good to have life in that kind of kingdom.
And I think that's just so important as we think of Jesus and what he's like. I think so
Mm.
often people have such a thin view of Jesus. We maybe
Hmm.
think sort of all the good stuff of life that sort of that belongs in a different box, and then we've got the Jesus
Mm.
box that is just a few spiritual things and cold
Hmm.
dusty churches and hymn books. But
Hmm.
actually, in Solomon at his best, the language you said there, just enjoyable and beautiful and fruitful and vibrant. This is a
Mm.
full-orbed kingship. This is a life embracing, a
Mm.
creation embracing. Solomon, he's a king, but he's a bit of a sort of a naturalist. Speaking of trees and beasts and reptiles and
Mm.
fish, again, a bit like Adam naming the creatures. We sort of get this
Yeah.
new Adam with Solomon's wisdom that he asked for is so comprehensive. His kingdom is just so multifaceted. It's all the senses, and I think if as Christians we are looking forward to being with Christ in the kingdom of heaven, to looking forward to being in the new creation. I think we just need to imagine all this and more. But I think
Mm.
so often I can have such a small view of Jesus, maybe someone who's just there to tell me what to do, or someone just to just to be concerned with spiritual matters. But actually, we
Mm.
get this lovely, lovely picture here, and I think even though we're going to get to some sin and some harder stuff very soon, I think just to pause and soak ourselves in.
Mm.
This is pretty amazing, and instruments and just music and culture,
Mm.
all this flourishes when there's a good king. Yeah, life is what it should be, which I
Mm.
think is which is a wonderful thing.
Mm. And you'd had some things I spotted in the notes about how this is different from the Tower of Babel. Mountain vibes and people vibes, but
Yeah.
can you tell us a little more?
Chapter 8, where you get sort of Solomon's prayer of dedication at the temple, and the sort of the culmination of. And we remember the temple. It's beautiful. It's wonderful, but fundamentally, it's God dwelling in the
Mm.
midst of His people. That's the most exciting thing. And Babel was a sort of a false version of that. Babel was let's
Mm.
create this mountain, and mountain very much meeting places with God. Um, I mean, I say mountain, then it was a tower, but I think shaped like a mountain.
Mm.
Let's build this tower to make a name for ourselves. The result is God scatters the people. That's Genesis 11.
Mm.
Build a tower to make a name for ourselves. Actually, the temple will be a house for God's name, for His
Mm.
glory. And the wonderful thing is, rather than what follows Babel is scattering, actually here you get gathering. You start to get that third aspect of the promise to Abraham, people, land, blessing. But if we dig into that a bit more, it's not just blessing for the people, but blessing to the nations through Abraham's family. And we
Hmm.
start to get that. So we get in chapter 8, when foreigners come to worship. I mean, that would have been
Hmm.
pretty unthinkable in that kind of world and culture which had their
Hmm.
localized gods. But no, here, God's God's temple was to be a house of prayer for all nations. And Isaiah
Mm.
will develop that theme further. It's blessing to the nations, nations coming and gathering. And so I think the Queen of Sheba, this incredibly rich
Mm.
monarch, coming to Solomon and being blessed, I think we're starting to see Babel was humanity saying, let's do it our way and make a name for ourselves. And it led to alienation and separation. Actually, put God at the center. And what do you get? You get peoples in harmony. Actually, you get a beautiful picture of the world
Mm.
increasingly united, not through might, not through conquest, but through the goodness of God. And that's what we look forward to in the new creation. We look forward to people from every nation, all cultures, with all their culture, gathering around the throne of Christ. And so we're starting to see that kind of thing pictured
Mm.
in part under Solomon.
Mm. We've mentioned the Queen of Sheba. I feel like she's a bit of a figure in cultural society. We might know the name, but who is she? What's going on with her here?
Yeah, she arrives with her own theme tune. Um, the arrival of the Queen of Sheba. She pictures this wealthy, incredibly rich and affluent and prosperous and fruitful monarch from a distant land. I think that's what we need to think of as Sheba. Don't worry where it is, but just someone coming, as was promised through Abraham. Just sort of the blessing from God to His people is overflowing. So
Mm.
even someone like the Queen of Sheba, who is wealthy, can come and say, "Even I'm amazed by what I see."
Mm.
I think you had some verses that we could read out from chapter 10 that would just give us a picture of this.
Yeah, she says to the king in verse 6, going down to 9, "The report I heard in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true. But I did not believe these things until I came and saw with my own eyes. Indeed, not even half was told me. In wisdom and wealth you have far exceeded the report I heard. How happy your people must be! How happy your officials who continually stand before you and hear your wisdom! Praise be to the Lord your God, who has delighted in you and placed you on the throne of Israel. Because of the Lord's eternal love for Israel, he has made you king to maintain justice and righteousness." That's huge, isn't it? For
Yeah.
a foreign queen coming to say all that. Wow.
And just, how much more can we hear those words of Jesus? How
Hmm.
happy your people must be. It was good to have a good king. It was good to have a wise king. Satan peddles this lie that God telling us what to do is to spoil our fun. But actually,
Yes.
the Queen of Sheba goes, "No, how good to have someone to help you
Yeah.
walk life-giving paths, not
Mm.
paths that lead to the grave." She says, how happy to listen to the wisdom
Mm.
of Solomon. And so as Christians, how much more, how happy to listen to the wisdom of Jesus.
Mm.
And I love that bit, because the Lord loved Israel, he put Solomon as king over them.
Hmm.
The king is for the sake of the people. And again, because the Lord loves us, his people, because the Lord loved Christians, Christ has been installed as king, because having Christ as king is simply the best thing. And
Mm.
my own heart, I need to hear that again and again.
Yeah.
Just the goodness of having Christ as king, both now as he teaches how to live, as he leads us and guides us and walks with us, and in eternity, in the future, when we dwell
Mm.
with him forever in a kingdom that will make Solomon's kingdom look pale. But just
Mm.
the goodness, I think, when we have in mind, when Jesus proclaims the kingdom of God, I think for the people who remembered these
Mm.
stories, their hearts would burn as if, oh, could it really be true? Could these days of
Mm.
happiness and joy really be coming again? I think
Wow.
that's what we have to have as we come to the
Yeah.
Gospels. And as
Huh.
Christians, we can have, as we celebrate Jesus our King, we think, what does it mean? It means
Mm.
peace, prosperity. It means all this goodness because of who he is. So, yeah, those are
Mm.
amazing
Oh,
verses.
I'm feeling my Monday morning moment might be brewing here, but I'm also aware that we need to go down this
Oh, I
wonderful.
know. And we
Ah,
want to stop there.
can we just
But
stay here? No,
and this
it's
this
so
this is
good.
as good as it gets in the Old
Oh,
Testament. This is the high point of the kingdom. But, well, carry the story on, Rachel, because we,
oh.
we know what happens.
Well, King Solomon, chapter 11, he loves many foreign women, and he ends up with 700 wives, 300 concubines. It's bad. The text says his wives turned his heart away, and if they're being turned away after other gods, then they're not. His heart isn't going to be following Yahweh. His heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God. It's that reminder that where your heart is, that's where your course of direction is. That's where you end up going. And he might have done good things, and he's done such good things. But yep, if his motives are off and his heart is in a different direction, then downfall awaits, basically.
It's that grasping, isn't it? He saw things he wanted: wives, riches, horses, all the things that Deuteronomy 17 said, don't go after those things.
Yeah.
But we can almost imagine he saw it was pleasing to the eye, and so he took. And tragedy, things go downhill. And the kingdom divides at this point, and this is helpful for Bible readers. We can start to get confused when we're reading the history from this point, because what's going on with all these different kings?
Yes.
After Solomon, God promises the kingdom will be torn in two. Remember, there were the 12 tribes. The end of Genesis, Jacob and sons. Jacob's 12 sons, they became the 12 tribes. They each had their bit of land in the promised land, but all one at this point. But now, from this point, we've got the tribe of Judah, which has Jerusalem at the center, which is where the kings reigned. David was from Judah. But then the other tribes, particularly the 10 tribes the north of Judah, they end up following their different king. They said, why do we want this one tribe in the south calling the shots? And so you end up with the kingdom splitting. It gets hard with the names, because from this point on, Israel refers to the northern 10 tribes, and Judah refers to Judah in the south, and also Benjamin that's just alongside. And so we've got Israel up in the north, Judah and Jerusalem down south. We track both, and the story sort of, it's like, I remember reading Lord of the Rings, and you kind of, for a while you're following the hobbits, and then you're following someone else, and sort of you flip between, you're following different people. And if we can just track that Israel, that's up north, and pretty much bad from the start. Jeroboam sets up golden calves, and we kind of we've seen that. I mean, amazingly, he even sets them up, says, here are your gods, O Israel. Just as was said back in Exodus, he sets up golden calves at Bethel and Dan. That's the south and the north edge of his kingdom. Basically, so no one has to go out down to Judah to worship. He says, if I can set up places of worship in my kingdom, no one will head down to Judah and go and follow that lot. So Jeroboam sets up these golden calves, and really he becomes a pattern for the northern kings. So often the northern kings, they sinned after the manner of Jeroboam. Down south, things are, well, better. They're a mixed bag down south. We're following David's line. We're following Judah. So that's where kingship should be located. But we get Rehoboam, first of all, Solomon's son, who he's encouraged by his older, wiser advisors to be a servant king, actually, in chapter 12, verse 7. Be a servant to the people, serve them. And I guess we're thinking, particularly for Christians, we're thinking, oh, this sounds good, servant king. That's the right way to do it. But Rehoboam ignores them, listens to his younger mates, and they say, no, you need to be harsh. You need to put these people in their place, which is what he did, and disaster follows. So from this point on, it's a pretty sad tale. In the north, pretty much bad from the start. Down the south, we get some good kings, we get some good moments. Through to chapter 16, really we're just seeing plots and intrigues. It's like reading a sort of medieval history of, people trying to, knock off the king so they can rule in their place. And we just see self-serving kingship. So even though the details may be confusing, I think partly we can see this is what life is like when people try and do it their own way. But what were some of the things you saw in these chapters?
I think just knowing that the north is probably bad news, and just having the overbrew of being, I don't need to remember all the names, I can follow the big picture. And I think just seeing people going after their own desires and motives is bad news. So I think you're highlighting of, we want a servant king, and when that isn't given, things don't go well. Therefore, we'll steal my Monday morning moment back to dwelling in the goodness of what it means to be under a good king, and that King Jesus is that kind of king. I've been really enjoying that thickness of that kind of vision. What you said about, do we have a thin view? I think it's so easy. Maybe our Bibles are printed in black and white. We're in a small local church and there's not loads of people. It doesn't look much. So we can just start to think, oh, well, I guess the new creation being with Jesus might not be that much. And just to remind ourselves what kind of king we're going to be serving in the new creation and who we serve now is the same. And he is one of this kind of kingdom. And just that's it's a good vision. Just really delighting in that and being grateful that I can have my wrong view of a thin view of what it means to follow Jesus and have a hope in an eternity that is not as thin as I might naturally lean into. How about for you?
Yeah, I love that. I think it's very similar. It's that, that bit in chapter 10, the Queen of Sheba coming, just saying, how happy your servants must be. I think, when I'm thinking rightly, just how happy we should be to belong to Christ. How good it is to have a wise king who tells us how to live.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, laws, instructions have got such a bad reputation, even in the church sometimes. Try and use them to justify ourselves, of course, and they're a crippling burden. But they're never meant to be that. It was God saves his people and then says, you're a saved people. I'm now going to teach you to live as free people. And just to see living with Christ as King is the most extraordinary privilege. Yeah, my heart's been warm just seeing that and thinking how blessed we are to live with him as our king, particularly when we look at kingship around and rulers around the world today. How blessed we are to have him as our king, and to have something of what the Queen of Sheba says sort of resonating in my mind and heart, I think is something I want to take into the week ahead.
Oh, praise Jesus. Hallelujah.
Praise
This
Jesus.
is good stuff. Which means our next episode will be in 1 Kings again from chapter 17 through to 2 Kings chapter 11. And our key chapters will be 17 to 19 and 4 to 5. The BibleOverBrew.com will have more questions and steers to help you see the big picture and not get completely buried in the detail. What is one thing we could keep in our minds as we jump into thinking about this next section?
Well, I thought of a sec. I'm going to give you two. I'm going to be naughty.
Go for it.
I'm going to be naughty. Firstly, just notice how these chapters we're about to come into, the stories of Elijah and Elisha, just break this downward. Things just seem to be going from bad to worse as you move through these chapters. And then in chapter 17, things change. And just notice God's intervention, I think. But in Elijah and then Elisha, to be thinking, how do these foreshadow Jesus in different ways? Maybe some of the things they do, some of the things they say. Don't want to give too many spoilers, but that'd be a great thing to look for as we read.
We'll be back for that. It's been an absolute joy and privilege. Thank you, Good News Broadcasting Association, for making this recording possible, and we will see you next time. Take care. God bless. Bye.
Bye. I was just expecting so much. I poured water all over my Bible during that. So it was always.
I didn't spot that actually.
No, and then when you were talking, I was going to subtly trying to mop it up with my sleeve. So there we go.
Well done. Oh dear! Honestly, that passed
Live
me by.
and ludicrous with Rachel and Matt.
Right, I'm stopping this recording.